When we talk about getting started speaking easier, what are we talking about? Well, we're talking about getting that initial airflow, getting those first few words out, right? Or that first word out, that first sound. And for many people, this is difficult. And so, what tends to happen is people tend to do what we call block. Right. Now, I generally don't like to use this word, but I'm using it because it's a familiar word. I usually say get stuck, and there's a reason for that that we may talk about later. But this is the most common word, blocking. So, what does that mean? Well, in one sense, it means that your airflow is what? It's blocked. Something happens, it's something called the Valsalva maneuver, where your air passageway closes up. You can't get any air out for speaking. Now, you can probably breathe, but sometimes your breathing gets shallow. But as soon as you go to say something, closes up, and you can't get the air going to get the words out. And so this can be very, very frustrating. And sometimes you have something in your mind that you'd like to say, you block, but then you can say something else, right? This has happened to me. Wanted to say this, then all of a sudden I go, whew, I don't know what's wrong. I can't. So I start talking. I'm able to say something else. Has that ever happened to any of you? It's definitely happened to me. So we're going to talk about three things essentially. One of them has to do with a long-term strategy. The other has to do with a shorter-term strategy. We're going to give you some tips and some tricks and some techniques to help you get started. And you've probably heard some of these, maybe you've used them, but we're still going to go over them because they are quite useful. So long-term and short-term, both are very important. And then we're going to talk about mindset, and that's what we're going to talk about first. And the reason that this is important is what we call the flexible mindset. The flexible mindset. This is very, very important in your both your long-term and your short-term strategy for improving your speech and especially for getting started speaking easier. When we say a flexible mindset, what are we talking about? Well, let me give you some examples of an inflexible mindset or a rigid mindset. An example is you have something that you want to say. So you have that initial word, and let's just say it's a question like, what time is it? What time are we going to go out tonight? Or hey, what's your name? Right? Just so you have a question that you want to ask, for example. And as soon as you contemplate asking that question, or as soon as you go to try to ask that question using that specific word, you block. No air. It will not come out no matter what you do unless you push it out. All right. So what's important here is to have a flexible mindset. And we'll talk about what that is and why that's important and how that can help you to get started speaking easier. When you're locked in to saying that particular word at that time, you have a rigid mindset, right? A rigid mindset. Now, someone might say, well, Michael, don't you say that your program will help us say what we want, when we want, the way that we want, right? Yes, it will. But the pathway there is by having a long-term strategy, a short-term strategy, and having a flexible mindset. Because just because you want to say something a certain way and you can't say it in that moment doesn't mean that you should get frustrated and say, well, I should be able to say these words right now. Why can't I say these words right now? Other people can. Why can't I? Well, guess what? In that moment, you can't. And so if you keep fighting it, it's like running your head into a brick wall. Running your head into a brick wall, you're just going to knock yourself out. So you want to think of your speech. This is an image or imagery that I use for all of my coaching clients. Think of your speech like water that's flexible, that flows, right? And if there's an obstacle in the way, the water will hit it and come back and hit it again in a different way. It will go around it. It will go over it. It may go under it, right? But unless it's dammed up, unless there's a dam, that water is going to find a way, right? It will continue to flow. So you want to think of your speech like water that will find its way, it will flow. Okay. And the reason is when you think of your speech that way, you are developing and you will have a flexible mindset. And that is important because the more you experience smooth speech, the more you experience success. And there's been lots and lots of studies on this. So the more you experience success, the more successful experiences you have, the smoother your speech is, the smoother your speech will be, the more success you will experience, the less you will be fixated on the words and on saying that particular word or not being able to say that word. So when you create a flexible mindset, what you're doing is you're saying, there's more than one way for me to say this, right? There's more than one way for me to say this. And you're also saying, I don't necessarily have to say this right now. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're saying, no, if someone asks my name, I have to say my name. Or if someone asks me a question, or if I need to ask a question and I need to ask it, for example, I'm standing and I'm ordering food or I'm ordering coffee or I'm in the drive-thru and I have to say something right now and I have to say this thing. Yes, that's absolutely true. But let me tell you, you always have some flexibility, some freedom, and we're going to give you some specific strategies for that. Remember, there's short term and there's long term. If you only focus on the short term, then what you're going to experience is inconsistency because it's not going to always work. But it will work much of the time, many of the time, maybe most of the time, but you don't want to depend on these tips or techniques long term. Right? You want to depend on the long term strategy. And a part of that is having this flexible mindset that says, now watch this, there's more than one way for me to say this, right? And I don't have to necessarily say it right now. I don't have to say it. Now, let me give you an example. Many years ago, I was a military officer and I was put in charge of my platoon. I was going through officer's basic course. And since I was the most senior, I was in charge of the platoon. And I had to stand up and I had to give a command. I had to call the platoon to attention. And I wasn't able to say it, right? So one time I had to call up the platoon sergeant and have the platoon sergeant call them to attention because I couldn't say it. So it's very, very embarrassing. But I figured it out. I said, okay, for whatever reason, I'm not able to just say attention. But this is the military, so I can't say a whole bunch. I couldn't say, so attention. I had to say attention. But what I figured out was a way to get some air flowing so that I could say attention. Right. So I didn't have to say something else. I just had to get the air flowing. And so I said, I don't know exactly what I said because it's been 30 years ago. But I got the air flowing by saying attention, attention, right? So I did something like that to get the air flowing. It sounded perfectly normal, sounded pretty good, in fact. But what happened was I created a flexible mindset. So the next time I had to do it, I had figured it out. And so I never had any problems. So the more successes I experienced saying attention, the more I was able to say attention without any problems at all. But in order to do that, I had to have a flexible mindset and say, wait a minute, right now I can't just say this word, but I have to say it. So how can I say it? So here's something that you want to think about. It's not a matter of if I can say it, because sometimes you have to say things. It's a matter of how can I do this? How can I, right? How helps us see the possibilities that we maybe couldn't see before. So when you want to ask a question or you want to say something and you have trouble saying it, don't say, oh, I can't say it, or I have to say this thing right now in this moment. Think with a flexible mind. So how can I say this? So sometimes it will mean, and we'll get to some of these little techniques or tools later, but sometimes it'll mean just adding a little sound, a little air to that. Sometimes it'll mean adding an introductory word to what you want to say. It could mean all of those things. So the flexible mindset, and I'm going to have Julius talk about this in just a little bit, but the flexible mindset is critical to your even being willing to use the tools that we're about to share with you. Remember, there are short-term tools, which we'll get to, and then there are the long-term strategy, right? And we'll talk about that. But the flexible mindset, if you don't open your mind and say, I don't necessarily have to say it this way. I don't necessarily have to say it at this time. If you don't open your mind to that, then you will just keep banging your head into the wall, and you'll put more pressure on yourself, and you'll be fixated, and you'll feel more anxious, and you'll continue to have trouble getting started. So flexible mindset is number one, not having a rigid mindset. Now, I'll have Julius come in and share his experiences with a flexible mindset, and then we're going to move to some of the short-term tips and tricks and tools that you can use. And then we're going to talk about the long-term strategy, right? So that you really don't have to use those tips or tricks. Now, if you do, you have them. They're like tools, right? You pull them out of the tool bag, you use it. And Julius and I will share with you a little later some of our experiences when we're speaking a different language, how we may still have to use those tools sometime. So, Julius, go ahead and pop in here, and let's just talk a little bit about this flexible mindset and what that's meant to you and for you.
100%, sir. First off, thank you so much for having me on this webinar again. Thank you, everybody who has joined. It's good to see all of you. Flexible and rigid mindset. Yes, this is definitely something that hits home with me. Definitely, I'm sure with a lot of you guys out there that are listening. In the past, when I had my old speaking style, I definitely had a rigid mindset. Not just a mindset, but also a rigid physical speech. Because everything up here was rigid, everything here was rigid too. Nothing was proactive, it was all reactive. So, definitely, I would always hone in on certain words, on certain ways I need to say these words. I didn't have any other option. This is how I need to say it. This is how I have to say it. That definitely caused me to fumble, stumble, never worked out for me. Never had a flexible mindset until I joined the program and I learned about the flexible mindset and how to attain it. Took time. It wasn't just a one moment, one deal where I was free from the rigid mindset, but it took time and patience and discipline and practice. And I definitely remember, actually, it was a recent experience. It was a certain person where I needed to tell them something. And in my head, I started to ruminate. Now, in the past, I would ruminate all the time, constantly, like I said, on these words, how I needed to say them. There was no other option. And then I would fumble. Recently, I had the same exact thing happen. So it reminded me of the old way. And then it reassured me, confirmed my new way of my flexible mindset. There was a certain person a couple weeks ago, I needed to tell them something. And then I ruminated on the words. This is how I need to say it, when to say it, all of it. As I was starting to ruminate on it, I started to anticipate, not in a good way. I started to fumble in my head. And then I went up to them. I started to speak. And I actually had a challenge. I said, wow, what just happened there? I went back to the rigid mindset. And so I saw the person again and I needed to tell them something else. That time, well, the next time it was like a redemption. I didn't have a rigid mindset. I didn't think about the words. I just went up there, knew what message I had to tell them. I told them with ease. I had a flexible mindset. I did not ruminate on the words. So that was just another confirmation of wow, where I used to be, where I am now, with the whole rigidity and flexibility, but not just mentally, but also physically, because the speech is now proactive, it's not reactive anymore.
That's a good point when you talk about proactive and reactive speech. When you go through the program, you learn how to speak more proactively, meaning you're more engaged in your speech. You're not just allowing it to come out. So you learn what we call proactive speaking skills. And these are just skills that people use who speak well. We'll just run through a couple of them. For example, hand gestures, um, body language, right? Posture, eye contact, facial expressions, head gestures, articulation. We call it articulation. It's really enunciation, but it's also articulation. So using your mouth more when you're speaking, modulating your voice. These are all some proactive speaking skills. Emphasizing. Believe it or not, all these things help you to speak more proactively, to be more engaged in your speech. And when you do that, you start creating a greater flow to your speech. You start creating smoother speech. And as you start creating this and you start experiencing successes with your speech, you stop ruminating, you stop worrying about, you stop fixating on the words and on the letters. And we have the free flow speaking exercise that helps with that tremendously. Modeling helps with that tremendously. We'll talk about. But as you start experiencing more success, you continue to experience more and more success. You continue to experience smoother speech. And so this is the long-term strategy, right? Is that as you use these tools that you learn in Pro 90D through modeling, free flow speaking, free flow modeling, proactive speaking, right? And even the tools that you're going to learn in just a few minutes, when you use those as a package, right, you put them all together and then the mindset shift, then, yeah, maybe initially for a period of time, just like when you're learning a new language, you can't say everything you want to say. You don't know all the vocabulary, right? But you learn it and you become more fluent and you get to a place where you're thinking less and less and it becomes automatic, right? But it's a process. In fact, Julius and I were talking about this earlier. It's a process. It takes a little bit of time. So once you go through that process, and especially if you can start out with this flexible mindset, right? You have to have it, or else you're going to be like, but I want to be able to say what I want to say right now. Well, that's like saying, I want to learn a new language and I want to be able to speak it fluently right now. And that's it, right? That's not probably not going to happen. So you have to go through the process. And what happens is you do become more fluent, more fluid, right? Your speech gets smoother and you stop fixating on certain words and letters and sounds, but you can't hop over to that, right? But that being said, we're going to give you some tools to help you do that. And these are tools that, once again, many of you probably know. I did a program many years ago called How to Get Started Speaking Easier, and I talked about all these things. So some of you have heard this before, but it doesn't mean that everyone's heard this. So that's why we're doing this again. And it works. It works. I even use some of these tools right now when I'm speaking Spanish, when I'm trying to speak Spanish. Sometimes I have to use these tools because I want to say something. And I may know exactly what I want to say, but I block. I get stuck. It won't come out. I can't get the air out. So I have to do certain things in the moment to say what I want to say. That's short term, right? Those short term tools or tips or tricks or techniques, whatever you want to call them. But guess what? I also have a long term strategy. And I know that if I employ the long term strategy, this will become less and less and less and less. And you have to have the flexible mindset to be okay with that, right? And I'll give you a specific example in a little bit. So remind me to do that. But let's talk about some specific things that you can do in the moment. So number one is finding a way to get the air flowing, right? To get the air flowing. And it could be something as simple as an ah. Now, just if you can, just say ah, 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 right? That just feels relaxing, right? And so you don't have to do like a real loud, long ah. It can be so quiet and so quick that no one can even hear it. What are we going to do today? I just said, what are we going to, what are we going to do today? What are we going to do today? Where are you going? Excuse me, right? So sometimes you'll hear it, sometimes you won't hear it. Sometimes it's so quick, it's so fast. And guess what? A part of having the flexible mindset is also understanding that other people do the same thing. You will hear other people say or or like. Now, I'm not saying that we should use like, and I'm not saying that we should use but in normal conversation, it's okay to use some filler words or some introductory words or some transitional words, is what I like to call them, as long as you don't overuse them. There's some words that I really don't like to use much at all, or some sounds. One of those is like, and yes, I will use like from time to time. And sometimes when you're with someone, it can become contagious and you'll start using like more, right? But like is one of the words that you want to really reduce your usage of. And a lot of people use it. A lot of people use it a lot, especially in younger people and people in the technology industry use like a lot, right? Overuse it. Another word or sound is. Some people will start right? So we don't necessarily want to use a bunch of ums, especially in professional environments, and we don't want it to be loud if we do use it, loud and long. A word that, a word or sound that I would say that one can use, especially if it's short and quiet, is a let's see. Let me just think about that. I'm not sure, right? So you can use it to get the airflow going, and it's perfectly normal and it's perfectly natural. And guess what? When you use it and you experience that smooth airflow and you experience success, you get to a place where you don't have to use it, right? Because you're not fixated on getting started anymore. Why? Because you have a flexible mindset. Now, if you have a rigid mindset, you're going to say, no, I don't want to have to do that. I can't, I need to figure out another way. But this is a part of the way, right? Remember, these are short-term strategies, but there's a long term, there's a long game, right? That we'll talk about. But short term, to help you, these are like this is one of the things that you can do to help you to get started speaking easier, just using a nice, soft, short ah. What else? Well, there are certain words that you can use, like so. One of my favorite words, you'll hear me use it a lot. Sometimes I'll even overuse it, but I'm okay with that. I don't really care. There are many people out there who use so, and many of these people are often very, very intelligent. I've watched people who are brilliant, they're geniuses, they're in charge of this, and they'll start out with so, blah, blah, blah. So it's very, very normal and totally okay to start something out with so. And I've had people, just by using that one word, it's opened up a whole new world for them, because now they've moved out of the rigid mindset into the flexible mindset. And they say, okay, why can't I throw a so in front of this? So what time? So how are you today? Right. So when they use that word so, it opens up the flow and allows them to say what they want to say, right? And say it smoothly. And the more they're able to do that, and you'll hear me say this a lot, the less fixated they become, right? The smoother their speech, the more successes they experience, so that if they don't want to, they don't necessarily have to start with so, or they don't have to start with so all the time. So it's strategic, right? When we use a sound like or we use a sound or a word like so, we're using it strategically to create flow. Let me say that again. When we use a word like so, or we use a sound like we're using it strategically to create more flow in your speech, to open up your mindset, right? And to make it more flexible. And then as you do that, and as you're working your long-term game, then you find, oh, okay, so I can say what I want to say. And occasionally I might just have to add a word or add a sound to it. But if you say, no, I can't do that, I can't add a sound, I can't add a word, then you're in the rigid mindset, and then you're going to keep getting stuck and having problems. Okay, so I hope that that makes sense. So adding sounds, in some cases, but I'm not going to really mention it. Words like so, words like and. There have been many times where I've started off a conversation with and. Believe it or not, it sounds totally natural. And how are you today? And let's see what we want, right? Or I'll start off and talking to a coaching client. And how's things been going for you? I'm not using it because I'm stuck. It's just my natural way of speaking now. So starting off something with an and, starting off something with a so, starting off something with a well. Well, we can probably do it this way. Okay, let's do this. Words, right? So find words that you can start with so that you're not just fixated on, I want to say this, I can't say it, I'm stuck. No, I can say these words or I can use these sounds and then blend or link right into the words that I want and say exactly what I want to say. Now remember, the more fluent you become, the less you think about words, right? Once you have a certain capacity in a language, you don't necessarily have to think about the words that you're using and how you're putting it together. You have an intention of something that you want to say. And so you just communicate or you articulate your idea or your intention without focusing on the words. Excuse me, 1 second. Just needed to clear my throat there and didn't want to do that in the mic. So as you become more fluent, you start seeing and thinking about the words less and less. So right now, as I'm speaking to you, I'm not thinking about words. I just have an intention of ideas and concepts that I want to impress upon you. And so the words are flowing because I'm fluent in this language. Does this make sense? So having this flexible mindset, using these introductory words and or sounds, creates a certain speech flow for you. It creates successful speaking experiences so that you stop thinking about and seeing the words. And you stop thinking about, at some point, getting started speaking. I've literally watched the transformation of people fixated on getting started in certain words and letters. And as they start to model and they start to do the free flow speaking and they start using introductory words, they no longer have a problem getting started. They just say, well, Michael, let me just ask you this. Michael, let me just, so Michael, right? They just get started. They stop thinking about it. Trust me, trust me, trust me when I tell you this is the way to go. Now, let's talk about some other things that you can do to help you get started. So we talked about using some sounds. We talked about using certain words. So what you want to do is develop kind of a library of words and sounds that you can use to get started. Now, here's one that I use for answering the phone. I remember graduated from college and I was getting my first major job and it was working on the phone. I was working at an insurance company. And I remember we had to say, hello, this is Michael Williams. Thank you for calling USAA Insurance Company. I don't mind mentioning your name because it's nothing bad. All right. Now, here's what happened. I couldn't say hello. I just couldn't say it. So when we were going through the training, I asked the trainer, I said, listen, sometimes I get a little stuck. Would you mind if I said, yes, hello? And I can say everything else. Just can I say, she said, sure, no problem, right? So I said, yes, hello, this is Michael Williams. Thank you for calling, blah, blah. And just that one word allowed me to get the job, right? Because I had to say hello. I'm sure we could have worked something out, but I had to say hello. And I used that one word, yes. And so I was able to say, yes, hello. And I think I just continued to say, yes, hello. Even now, when I answer the phone, I'll either say, this is Michael Williams, or yes, hello. Right? Yes, hello, this is Michael Williams. Yes, this is Michael Williams. And I just say it. I don't necessarily have to say it, but I say it because I like it. What I'm saying to you is that when you have the flexible mindset, it opens up a whole new world. And you say, well, how can I say this? Well, let me just add a yes to it. Okay. Someone comes up to you in a restaurant and you're getting ready to order. And all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, I can't get the first few words. I can't get, just say, yes, let's see what I want today. Do that. People do that all the time. Like I literally hear people, yes, thank you. It's good to see. Yes, let me take a look. Yes, I think I want this or that. So yes, I'll take this. Or perfectly normal, perfectly natural. Someone says, well, I shouldn't have to do that, but it's perfectly normal. Other people do it. So why shouldn't you have, why couldn't you do it? Especially if you need to do it right now strategically to get started. Now, those of you that don't like the strategy, that's okay. You're going to probably end up staying in the rigid mindset, and you may not even want to watch this webinar. You might just want to jump off and go, okay, that's a bunch of crap. But remember, these are short term tactics, if you will, short term. There's a long term gain. And this is part of it. Right? Using these tools and having a flexible mindset is part of that long term strategy so that you don't have to necessarily use those things if you don't want. I like the way I like using so. I like using sometimes. I like using yes. And so I continue to use it. And there are times where I have to actually use those words or similar words in Spanish because I'm not completely fluent there yet. What else? So you can use words like yes. So is a word that, again, I use a lot, but sometimes I say it so quietly and so quickly that I don't even know that I'm saying it. And other people wouldn't know unless they're listening, unless they're noticing or looking for it. Now, you'll look for it now and you'll hear me say, so this, so that, right. Totally fine. Some of you may not like that. So what? Right. So what? But the thing is that you can say an or so very quietly and very quickly where it's barely heard, but that might be the thing that you need to do to get yourself started speaking, right? Until you can develop that flow. So those are just a few things. Now, let's talk about something that you can tell yourself. So there's an affirmation that we have, and it says, I don't have to rush. I can take my time and say what I want to say. Or I don't have to say this thing right now. I don't have to say these words right now. I can use other words. I can use different words. It's flexible in terms of how I say what I want to say. So let me give you another strategy that I've employed. Sometimes it's turning the statement around or turning the question around. So if I say, uh, what time are we going out this evening? Well, here's one way I could say it. So what time are we going out this evening? Right. But I can also say, so we're going out at what time? Now that may sound a little strange, but it's actually not strange at all when you say it. So we're going out at what time? Where are we going? So we're going where? Right. Now, I'm not saying that you have to say that, and I'm not saying that you need to do that all the time, but having that flexible mindset just allows you to switch it around. You're still saying what you want to say in the sense of asking a question. You're communicating the exact idea that you wanted. You're just being flexible in the way. You're being flexible in the words or the organization of the words, right? The arrangement of the words. You're being flexible. So when a person says, no, gotta say it, and if they can't say it, then they're stuck. But says, yeah, I can just switch that around, right? Now, there are times where you may have to substitute words, right? Substitution. Well, what do we need your program for? I've been doing that for years. Remember, these are tools. This is strategic, right? To help you get your speech flowing like water. So there have been times, absolutely, where I've needed to, I couldn't say this word, so I had to think of another way to say it. I had to think of other words. But you know what? What it helped me do is think very quickly on my feet. It helped me broaden my vocabulary. Now, instead of having one way to say something, I've got 5 different ways or 10 different ways to say the same thing, or 5 different ways to explain something. And you know where that came in handy? Well, it came in handy as a professor. It came in handy as a workshop leader. It came in handy as a preacher, as a teacher. And now it comes in handy in what I do now. Being able to think quickly on my feet. I could be in a live workshop and you could ask me a question and I could quickly think of how to answer that question, or to let you know that I can't answer it now, I'll answer it later, or I don't have the answer to it. But I didn't panic because I had a flexible mindset and I could explain something. I've literally watched thousands and thousands and thousands. I've spent thousands, probably tens of thousands of hours teaching and speaking. And I've watched someone that I've been explaining something to, And you can see that they weren't quite getting it. What I wasn't explaining it clearly, or they weren't getting it. So then, because I had a flexible mindset and a broader vocabulary, because I had to have a broader vocabulary, I was able to explain it this way and this way. And then you could see the lights go off. I got it. They got it, right? I would not really have been able to do that had I not had to have that flexible mindset and change the way I said things and use different words. So, what you're developing or what you have developed over your life is actually going to turn into an asset. It's going to become a gift, but only if you develop it. If you leave it where it is and you just use these tips and tricks and tools that I'm talking about, and that's it, no, it puts a lot of pressure on you. You're not saying the things that you really want to say. But if you use them strategically and you work the long term, which we're going to talk about, you work that, then it will help you. It'll become an asset. Julius, let me just pause here for a moment and see if you had anything to add before we move on to some of the more longer term
Sure.
strategies.
Yes, totally. I did answer a couple questions on the chat pertaining to this about the proactive skills. And I know I touched on the when I said proactive is both mental and physical, because we could learn the skills, the tools, using practice intro words and sounds and extending and blending. We could definitely develop and know how to use them, but it all starts in the mind though. If the mind is against using them because your old habit is fighting you, because you're trying to change your old habit into a new habit, it's going to be rough trying to use those skills because the mental aspect of it is not being changed. And that's why you, sir, always go back to the whole mentality. This is a holistic approach. It's not just relying on the skills and the tools, because we can learn them, but to like actually use them the right way fluently and be great speakers, it all starts up here. That's what I definitely was learning throughout this process, is that my mind, if my mind is telling me that I cannot do this and it is going to the worst case scenario, then even though I know the skills, I know how to extend and blend, but if I'm not winning up here, then it's not going to come out as something that I want. So definitely everything was rigid for me. Everything was. So when I had to learn how to be flexible and not really rely on what I wanted to say. I mean, yes, as you said, eventually you will get to that point where, yeah, you want to say something, you will be able to say it. But right now, we are trying to transform ourselves. So you need to sort of compromise certain things. Because you say, man, like this guy speaks like this. How come I can't, man, like just the way he's doing it? He wants to say what he wants to say and he's doing it. I want to be like that too. Well, you will be. But right now, you need to just take a step back, compromise a few things for your own good to really build those blocks to get to that point where, yeah, you will have something that you want to say, and then it'll be easy for you because you don't have that the rigidity anymore. It's flexible, but now you're in control of it now. So you can say whatever you want to say, but it's still flexible.
Mhm.
That makes sense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's kind of like it's kind of like like we said, speaking a different language. I think you mentioned that you have another language. So for me, it's Spanish, and I can remember plenty of times I'm in an Uber and I know that the person speaks Spanish and I want to say something and I block, can't say it. Or I'm in the barber's chair and I want to say something. And so what do I have to do? I have to have a flexible mindset. And I have to say, well, what sounds or what other words can I use right now to get this out? Or how else can I say this? I might have to just figure out a different way to say this right now, because if I stay fixated, if I keep a rigid mindset, I won't say anything, right? Because I'm going to get anxious and I'm not going to be able to say anything. So and sometimes the opportunity passes and you have to also be willing. I was just talking with a client. That will happen on this journey. You'll want to say something, you'll be in a discussion or you'll be in a meeting and the opportunity will pass. And you have to be flexible enough to say, all right, I don't want that to happen. I'm going to do my best to make sure that that doesn't happen. But there are times where it will happen, and I'm not going to beat myself up about. So, yeah, I'm in the car, want to say something, doesn't come out, try to find a different way. Most of the time, I will find different, but sometimes I don't. And I wait, and I say, okay, I'm going to say something else, right? I'm going to find a way to say something. And so I'll say something else. We'll get the conversation going, and then I'll start flowing, right? And I'll start speaking. And now I'm creating a successful speaking experience. So guess what? The more I do that, the more that changes my mindset, the more it changes my identity that says, well, you can speak smoothly. You can say what you want to say. It doesn't matter if you struggle, but you got it going. You got the flow going. So the more I do that, if I did it every day, then this whole process of uh, fluency would accelerate dramatically, right? So if I was exposed to it or immersed in the process, my fluency would increase more rapidly. But because I'm not exposed to it on a daily basis, my fluency increases slower, but it's still increasing. But the point is the flexible mindset. So let's just talk about the long-term strategy. Some of you have heard me talk about this long-term strategy that gets you to a place where, hey, I don't have to use tools or tricks, and you don't even think about that anyway because your identity has changed. You're no longer thinking about getting started. You're just getting started. You're no longer thinking about blocking because if it does happen, you have tools, but more than likely, it's not really going to happen. So what the long-term strategy is through some of the tools that we have, one of which you've always heard me talk about, modeling, right? Free flow speaking, free flow modeling, and all of these tools are in the course, and proactive speaking, proactive speaking skills, proactive speaking skills. So all of these are long-term tools. Modeling is a positive distractor. It helps you distract yourself from yourself. When you're thinking about how my model would say something, how would my model feel, you're no longer thinking about the words or how you usually say it. You're thinking about your model. And when you practice modeling, when you practice it, then your brain knows how to do it. Your brain has something called mirror neurons. And these mirror neurons help you do a few things. It helps us with empathy, but it also helps you when you're studying someone and you want to mimic or model what they're doing. This comes out of observational learning, but also neuroscience, right? So you watch them, and the areas in your brain that manage speech begin to light up, right? And the more that you try to mimic them, the more that you stare at them and you listen to them and you try to practice, the more those areas light up and the more that they strengthen, right? They fire together and they wire together, okay? So modeling is a very, very powerful tool for quickly transforming your speech and for long term being able to get started speaking easy because you stop thinking about it. It stops becoming a problem. Remember, it's a process like becoming fluent in a language. You don't just get there, you go through the process. So, modeling is one. Free flow speaking is another exercise that I created some years ago that helps you get your system used to speaking with a more constant, smooth airflow, right? It also helps you. What if you don't have a problem with getting stuck, but you just have a problem with interrupting yourself or thinking too much about the words that you want to use? I've worked with people who don't really stutter, but they get too caught up in the weeds and they start interrupting themselves. They start thinking about the exact words. And so their speech is kind of choppy and it's not as coherent as it could be. Free flow speaking will help you with physically developing smoother airflow, but also mentally, it will help you Stop thinking about the words and just speaking and articulating your thoughts, like streaming your thoughts. Think of a stream in terms of data, right? There's no interruption. There's just streaming your thoughts. We interrupt when we start thinking about the words, right? So you learn how to stream your thoughts, free flow speaking. And there's probably some other benefits to it as well. But free flow modeling is where you are taking your modeling style, right? The style that you've adopted from your model, and you're taking that flow that you learned from free flow speaking, and now you're practicing saying things that you want to say. So, for example, let's say you have a meeting and you know that you have to give an update. So, what you do is you do a little bit of modeling practice. Maybe you do a little bit of free flow speaking, just talking about a couple of minutes. And then you rehearse what you're going to say using the modeling style. You're free flowing because you're not copying exactly what your model said. You're saying what you want to say, but you're allowing yourself to flow through it and to say, and it takes some practice for you to be able to do that, but that's what this is all about. So free flow model, and then all of the proactive speaking skills also helps you with that long game. It's a longer term strategy that when you start speaking more proactively, you find that you speak with a greater flow, you speak smoother, you speak more powerfully. And as your system, your entire system experiences this successful speech, guess what happens when you need to get started? Guess what happens when you need to speak? You stop thinking about it. It's no longer a problem. Not only have you physically transformed your speech, but you've also mentally, psychologically, and you've also identity wise, you've transformed your identity. So you're not the kind of person who tends to get stuck. Remember, everyone who's ever lived, doesn't matter who they are, has gotten stuck or has had disfluencies at some point. There may be times where that person is perfectly fluent, but they haven't been and they are not and will never be 100% fluent 100% of the time. Everyone's going to have some degree of disfluency, and so are you and I. So don't compare yourself with others and say, well, why are they speak so fluently? Why are they so perfect? And they're not perfect. They have disfluencies. You just may not be witnessing them right now. And what we find is with our clients, they'll look around and they'll see, wow, actually people are not as fluent as I thought they were. This person uses a whole bunch of filler words. This person does this and that. So long-term strategy, these are the things that will help you long-term to transform your speech so that you stop thinking about it. Having a flexible mindset allows you to use these things as well as the specific tools that we talked about, introductory words, introductory sounds, right? Occasionally changing or turning or reversing the order of how you're saying something. You're using the same words, you're just reversing the order. And then, as a last resort, literally changing how you say something, using different words. These are all things that if you have to use them, you use them, but they're like a bridge to help get you to a place where you don't have to use them. But when you do, you still feel confident. You still feel confident that, hey, I've got my tool set. If I'm ever speaking and for whatever reason I get stuck, I can just pull these tools out. So you feel more confident about your speech and about your ability to handle any situation, even if you get stuck, even when you have a disfluency. Right? The last thing that I'll say is that when a person who maybe never stuttered, when they're speaking, you'll hear them go back and repeat something, or you'll hear them throw in a filler word or a filler sound, or sometimes it's that they're like right, and they'll do stuff. That's their brain naturally adjusting for that disfluency. Okay? The brain just naturally does it. So the good thing about what you're learning is that you will consciously be able to adjust for that disfluency when you need to. And eventually it becomes unconscious. So as I'm speaking to you now, I haven't felt any disfluencies, but that doesn't mean that there haven't been any. And my brain just simply adjusts for it automatically, just like it would for anyone else, right? For anyone else, we'll just adjust for those disfluencies or disruptions in their speech. And that's where you want to get. All right. So Julius, let's answer some
Sure.
questions. And is there anything else that you wanted to say about tools or tips or tricks, things that maybe you've used to help you? So that's one. And then is there anything you want to say about flexible mindset, rigid mindset? And is there anything that you want to say about these longer term strategies, tools, and skills that kind of help transform your speech for the long term?
100%. Those long-term strategies, modeling, free flow speaking, free flow modeling, those were the things that opened everything up to me with this whole proactive approach. Because like I said, everything was reactive. Everything in the past was reactive. I was reactive to every single speaking situation, never proactive. So that opened so many possibilities, and it's always exciting knowing that, oh wow, I can be proactive with my speech. I don't have to stay rigid with my speech because even the breathing was rigid back then. I had to, as a habit, a rigid habit, I had to expel all my air out and then start speaking. That was literally my habit. I had to let it all out. I couldn't breathe in first and then speak. No, I couldn't do it. My rigidity mindset was exhale everything out and then talk. Can you imagine how that would have been like, sounded like? And then trying to reverse that. So, and then reversing it over time, I said, oh, okay, now I could be flexible. Now I could breathe. I could breathe first, then speak, not exhale, then speak. That's really what my mind and my body made as a habit was
Mhm.
the inhalation and exhalation. So the modeling, the free flow speaking, that one definitely helped me with that because I would have to inhale a big amount of air and speak all the way. And I did this constantly every single day. My blueprint, like literally was like a lifestyle. I had a checklist of practice I need to do each and every day, which included the modeling, free flow speaking, free flow modeling. This helped me go from the rigidity mindset to the flexibility mindset because the free flow definitely helped with the words. I didn't have to think about the words. You just
Mhm.
talk, maintain airflow.
Mhm.
What we all have, struggles with was the airflow because of
Mhm.
the words that we are thinking about. But over time, you get used to that. You learn how to maintain airflow. Then you could start thinking about words again and structure sentences and ideas and thoughts. It all just takes time. So, yeah, definitely. Now I realize the difference between reactive and proactive and the time it takes to get there. This is a lifestyle. You have to agree and pretty much um, accept that this is a lifestyle. This is a journey. I like to say journey, you know,
Mhm.
smooth speech. So,
Very good. Very good. So let's open it up for any questions, and you can stay on. You don't have to turn your video off. Does anyone have any questions? We have a few more minutes left. If you have some questions about what we talked about today or anything related to smooth speech or Pro 90D, you can ask Julius or you can ask myself. Now is the time. So as we wait for some questions, uh, let me just kind of wrap up and let you know so that if you're watching this webinar, don't think that Pro 90D is just all about using tips and tricks that have been around forever, things that people have probably figured out themselves, switching words around, using introductory words and sounds. Of course, we know these things, this is nothing new. We know that people have been doing this forever. But remember, we package them and we use them strategically to start creating more and more success, to start creating flow. So something as simple as using the word yes to answer the phone or to get started, or using the word so, or using a soft or even a soft so, right? These are words and letters and sounds. Using the word and to get started or to transition, right? These are all things that we can do strategically to help you experience success. So there are people who, like me, Couldn't answer the phone. I used to hate answering the phone. Once I threw a yes in front of it. Now all of a sudden I can answer the phone fluently. Um, Maybe going to order food. Couldn't order food, but throw a so in front of it or a yes in front of it. Now I can order food. Okay. So then you look at these as strategies, and they are tools that you can use. But then you understand the long-term strategy, all the things that Julius just mentioned, the modeling, the free flow speaking, free flow modeling, proactive speaking skills, all those things. Believe it or not, the self-talk and affirmations, um, the audio listening, video watching, all boosts your confidence. It changes what you think about. It changes your mindset. So now that you feel more positive, you feel more confident, you are able to speak better. Looks like you had something to say, Julius. No? Okay. All right. So we have that. And then we also talked about the flexible mindset. So we talked about the tools. We talked about the long-term strategy that you need to use up on the board. Flexible mindset. If you don't have that, you may not even be able to do the other stuff, because if you're still blocking and you're still not able to get stuck and you're still not able to get started because you have a rigid mindset, and you might not even get a chance to use those other tools. You might not even want to, because you're like, I need something that works right now. And a part of it is this flexible mindset, which allows you to use the tools to get started. It allows you to use these long-term strategies to help you speak smoother. So flexible mindset. Any questions for us, guys?
Sir, I do want to add something to that. A recent
Absolutely.
experience, or it was many experiences that this happened, but I just recalled it. Talking about being flexible. So at my job as a paramedic, I have to go to the hospital. I have a report to give to the nurses, the doctors about the patient, everything, the full story, what happened, what we did. I do remember this happened a couple of days ago because I was talking to my partner about it. Usually, it's I speak to one nurse and I give everything to her, and then we leave. But this day it was I had to give her the report, and then another nurse came, asked. Then I gave her one. The doctor came, I gave him, and then the surgeon came and I gave him the same report. But all four of them were different. Not different in a way that they were contradictory, but I was flexible. I knew what I needed to say, what they had to know. I wasn't picking the words and structuring everything the same exact way. I gave four different reports, but it was like the same report, if that makes sense. So I didn't have to think about it. It was so flexible. And I told my partner, man, I just gave him my report 4 times. Like, I don't know what's going on with this hospital, um, but I was like, oh, wow. I literally gave 4 different reports, but it was the same message with ease. I didn't think about the words. I just knew what I needed to say.
Right.
So
Right.
that was a nice, another confirmation about this whole rigidity, flexibility, because my
Right.
interview with you that people can see, that was me with the rigid mindset. I needed to say each word, but I was blocking and stumbling and I couldn't go past it because of my rigidity.
Yeah. That's a great example of how 4 reports,
Mhm,
essentially the same content,
mhm.
but you didn't have a rigid mindset where you felt like you had to use the same words and say it exactly the same way.
Exactly, but it was the same message, same everything. It wasn't contradictory at all. So that
Right.
was
Yeah.
nice.
That's a great example of just almost anything in life. I can say what I want to say, but I can be flexible in how I say it, right? And so when you feel like that, it really does boost your confidence. So I want to see if I can find the program called How to Get Started Speaking Easier, because I would say pretty much everything in there is still applicable to what we talked about today, even though it's an older program. So if I can find it, I'm pretty sure I can definitely find the audio, but I'll see what I can find. And then in an email, I'll send that to all of you so that you have it. I'll send you, it'll might be in the Soundwise mobile app as a little program or something. So I'll give that to you guys as a gift. All right. I think we're done, man. Really appreciate it. Thank you all for being here. Um, those of you who are watching the replay, if you have questions, I believe you can just reply back and we'll get your questions and we'll answer. But do try to come so that you can ask us questions live if you're able to make it. Thank you again, Julius, for being here and for taking the time out, and
Right,
thank you for your insights and stuff.
Thank you so much for having me.
So guys, we have those links up. Hopefully you've gotten them down, you've clicked them, and we look forward to seeing you inside Pro 90D, either in the self-study or working with us. We do have now a Facebook group that we formed, and so you want to check that out as well. All right, so we'll see everyone later. Thank you. Hey there, my name is Michael Williams, Pro 90D founder and smooth speech coach. Are you tired of struggling with your speech? Ready to transform your life and boost your confidence? Then it's time for you to enroll in my Pro 90D private laser focused coaching program.
I can only say is thanks. I'm due to Pro 90D and Michael and the support and how he's just changed my life and my speech.
I honestly think that if not for the laser focused coaching with Michael, I wouldn't be where I am right now. It's just impossible.
Don't let speech struggles hold you back. Book your call or enroll today. Let's take the first step towards a smoother, more confident you. Let's do it together. Book your call or enroll today.